Takom Blitz Jagdtiger Porsche Production type. I bought this model off eBay. The Henschel type seems to be more available, but I wanted the Porsche type, and I ended up ordering the kit directly from China, and I ordered it last year during the pandemic, and it took 5 months for it to get here. The quality of the molding is pretty much middle of the road. There's very little flash, but I had to scrape the seams on pretty much every part. Being that it's the Blitz version of the Jagdtiger with no interior, the parts count is fairly low. After looking over the sprues, my only initial complaint would be that the barrel is molded in 2 pieces. It seems like, 2021, we've moved past that 2-piece barrel thing. There are a few slide molded pieces in the kit, and so I just don't understand why they don't do a slide molded barrel. The kit comes with individual link tracks, and it seems like newer kits, they all have individual link tracks, or at least link and length tracks, which I think is important because, I just don't like rubber band tracks. I haven't painted the model yet, so I don't have an opinion on the decals. This is my first Takom kit, so I don't have any previous experience to draw from. Photo etch looks pretty nice. It's thin, it's fine. The instruction manual's good. It's clear and easy to follow. I didn't have any issues assembling the model. One nice thing about the instructions is that Takom gives you some color 5 views, which I think is very nice. And once I finish with this model, I'll cut those from the instructions and save them. I have my sprue cutters, my hobby knife, my sanding sticks, and my tweezers. Ready to get started. The suspension and road wheels are built. The road wheels, no problem with the road wheels, the drive sprocket, or the rear idler. The suspension parts, on the other hand, took a lot of sanding and a lot of scraping. Granted, these parts will be practically invisible once the model's built, but they did require some work to clean them up. There is a little bit of suspension movement, and I'll try to utilize that when I place the model on a display base. The chassis and road wheels are done, so I'll set that aside, and I'll get ready to start on the tracks. I know a lot of modelers don't like individual link tracks. They're far too tedious. But these tracks, they went together pretty good, and it's really not a big deal. To me, the worst thing about these tracks was cutting the parts from the sprue. That was a little bit tedious. I used a strip of pink foam board to assemble the tracks, and the only reason I did that is it gave me a nice flat surface to work from. I have a fine point Tamiya sprue cutter, so I can clip the parts out pretty close when removing them from the sprue, but even so, the large cleat part of the links required some sanding. The tracks articulate nicely, so I should be able to get a good natural look when I put the tracks on the model. I spent about 6 hours in total building the tracks, and that includes cutting the track pieces from the sprue and sanding the parts. Typical construction for building the rear piece of the hull. I left the exhaust covers off for painting. I have a small gap where I attach the rear plate to the hull tub, and I'll have to fill that gap with putty later on. The instructions require that you remove some of the detail off the superstructure, so I used a flat chisel blade and I scraped off where it wasn't required, and then I used a piece of 400 grit sandpaper and just scuff the area to get it to blend. The rear fighting compartment access doors are functional. Not sure what I'll do with those since there's no interior. I may leave one slightly ajar. The photo etch that comes in the kit is nice. It's easy to trim from the sheet. It fits perfectly. Additional parts have been added to the superstructure. The bow machine gun's in. The upper hatches are on. Periscopes, vision ports are all in. Of course, the spare track hooks. The rear of the fighting compartment was added with the access doors. The fit of that was good. The engine cover assembled. There's a small piece of photo etch, and then there's the machine gun pedestal. As I mentioned earlier, the main gun is 2 pieces, so it does require a little bit of work. After gluing the gun halves together, I sanded the gun, then I painted it with automotive primer and sanded again. And it came out pretty good. I don't see any visible seams. The front armor plate of the fighting compartment. Now, after buying this kit, I watched a couple videos where some guys had difficulty with this part. Now, the videos I watched were the Henschel version, and I don't know if there's any differences for the superstructure. I did get this part to fit without any modification. Granted, it does take a little bit of force, and you got to kind of push it in place. But once you get it in place, the fit is pretty good. I did have some small gaps on the side that I'll touch up with some putty. When connecting the upper and lower halves of the model together, I ended up with this gap in the back. Now the front fits perfectly, but I got a pretty large gap here in the back. I've had problems with gaps the last couple models I built. I'm starting to wonder if it's me or if it's the model. So I'm not going to make any judgment on the kit and whether it has gap issues. Maybe it's just me. The gaps I had during construction have been filled and then sanded, so we'll just move on from that. Well, the model's assembled, and it builds very quickly. I decided the model needed a little bit of character, so I removed a few sections of the fenders. Half of the reasoning for removing some of the fender sections was so I can show off the track sag. Well, the model's ready for paint, but before I start that process, I want to get the suspension positioned. So the next thing I need to do is start the display base. I bought this trumpeter, German railway track, and I'm going to use that as an item of interest on the display base. I didn't assemble the track as it calls out for in the instructions because I'm going to add my own track ballast, so I need to have the railroad ties up higher than they would be if I assembled it per the instructions. I used Sculpt-A-Mold to shape the terrain on top of the pink foam, and then after that I added some pre-mixed grout to put my track depressions in. Once I had the track depressions made, I used some additional grout to set the track depression slightly below ground level. And once that was done, I painted the base with latex paint. Once the latex paint was dry, I coated the surface with full-strength white glue and then sprinkled on fine sifted dirt. Once the glue beneath the dirt dries, I'll saturate the dirt with scenic glue, and that'll lock everything down permanently. Well, that's it for this one. In the next video, I'll finish the model, and thanks for watching.